Start. We are ready to start. You're ready to start.
Yelling at me about
I guess I have to use this, huh?
man, you don't have to. That was pretty weak.
Because you guys are a good group, so. I'm calling this meeting of the Prescott AMA Groundwater Users Advisory Council to order. Today is August 8th, 2022, and the time is 10 o'clock. This meeting is held in person, and I'm Leslie Grazer, the current chair. Would members please introduce themselves? We'll go just down the line.
My name is Jim Holt. I'm the vice chair. I've been a member of the GUAC for 8 years now.
John Munderlow, GUAC member for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half.
Todd Recker, and I've been a member of GUAC for a number of years. I don't know, probably 8, 9, something like that.
Thank you, members. So we have a quorum, and would ADWR staff please introduce themselves too?
Good morning, my name is Kyle Miller. I'm the AMA director in charge of program implementation.
My name is Melissa Sykes. I'm the Water Management Assistance Program Coordinator.
Morning, my name is John Regan. I'm the statewide planning manager at ADWR.
Good morning, I'm Amanda Long, I'm the AMA Planning Manager.
I'm Kenny Shepard, Groundwater Users Advisory Council Coordinator.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to look into the audience, if we have audience members that are interested in introducing themselves. We do have 2 here present, and I think it's important to note the 2 we do have here. Do you mind introducing yourself so that you know you're here?
Sure. I'm Neil Wadsworth. I'm the Utilities Director for the town of Prescott Valley.
I'm Tracy Lund. I'm the Water Resources Project Manager for the town of Prescott Valley.
Thank you for joining us today, and I wanted to move online. Please type your name and your affiliation into the chat box. And we'll be sharing those.
Leslie Hoy, Citizens Water Advocacy Group.
Thank you, Leslie.
In the chat.
Nothing else in the chat. Okay, I'd like to start with agenda item 2 and the meeting logistics. And Ms. Shepard is going to help us with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As you know, this is our first in-person meeting since 2020. It's great to have everyone here present. Just a reminder for those of us online, please keep your phone muted. This helps with audio feedback. If you have any questions or comments during the meeting, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we will read and address them during our call to the public. And for those of you online and present as well, the call to public will be your time to address the council and any questions that you may have. This meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to our website once WebEx gets it generated. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me in the comments or you can contact our help desk. Their number is on the screen. Thank you, and that is all I have.
Thank you very much. We'll move to item 3, which is the AMA Director's Report. Mr. Miller, Director Miller, it's good to see you. Thank you for walking us through this item.
Of course, good morning and thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council. I'd like to begin by thanking you for your patience and flexibility with us over the last couple of years as we met online. We're excited to be back in Prescott AMA, meeting with you in person, and we're looking forward to continuing the work of the GUAC in person moving forward. As Kennedy said, this is our first hybrid meeting where interested parties and members can join virtually or in person. We're hoping that continues to increase participation and interest moving forward. I think we're going to plan on doing this moving forward, so I'm looking forward to having that. I do want to give a quick shout out to Kennedy for all the work that she's done organizing this and all the background work to make sure the technology works and getting us set up for a hybrid meeting. I appreciate everything she's done there. I'd like to use the AMA report to provide some updates on all we've accomplished since we last met, both in the AMA section of the department and across the department as a whole. We've been extremely busy, so I'm going to focus on just a few highlights here. Starting with 2021 annual water withdrawal and use reporting. As I'm sure you all know, annual reports are due on March 31st of each year. And now that we're about 4 months past that date, I'd like to provide a quick summary for those numbers. Our AMA-wide failure to file number, so all the AMAs together, is currently at 5.7%. And our goal is to end the year at about 5% or below 5%. We did just send out another round of failure to file notices on July 25th. So we're expecting that number to continue to drop here over the next month or so. And we anticipate that we'll end the year right at about 5%, maybe a little bit below. So right on track with our goal. We have maintained and even slightly increased the number of reports being filed online, and that benefits our data quality, allows staff to focus on tasks other than data entry, and that's a number that we track yearly, trying to bump it up a little bit each year, continuous growth in that area, and we were able to do that again this year. Speaking of data entry, we're very nearly done with that aspect of the annual report seasons. Those numbers will be used in the 2021 AMA use estimates that we compile and publish in early November. That's a long and detailed process of going through and QCing all the data, so you may hear from some of us with amendment requests or questions about annual reports, but we do have a early November goal for those states. Moving on to the management plans. Following the 2018 Auditor General Report, the department set an ambitious goal to have all 5 FIT management plans adopted by the end of 2022. We are on track to reach that goal, with the Phoenix hearing scheduled for August 10th, and the Santa Cruz hearing is scheduled for September 27th. Adoptions then typically occur about 30 days after that hearing. Okay. A little closer to home here, the 5MP hearing for the Prescott AMA took place on May 31st here at the Prescott Valley Library, and the order of adoption was issued by Director Bishotsky on June 30th. We received no motions for rehearing, and as such, the order became final on July 30th. So what comes next? The conservation requirements in the 5th management plan will take effect on January 1st, 2025, and will remain in effect until the legislature determines otherwise. In anticipation of the effective dates of those requirements, the department will be available to assist with any questions, and will be mailing out courtesy reminders for any documents that are required pursuant to the 5MP. That includes things like provider profiles if you're a municipal provider regulated by the non-per-capita program, or BMP worksheets if you were a BMP farm, things like that. Moving on to field services. Our field services team has been busy this water year and recently completed a basin sweep in the Prescott AMA. 283 well site visits were made in the Prescott AMA over the course of the water year. And of those, 141 index wells were visited and 122 water level measurements were taken. Index wells, as just a refresher, are a group of about 1,800 wells that the department visits annually, semi-annually, or quarterly, and measures depth to water manually. Field Services also completed a basin sweep early this year, spring of 2022, in which 147 wells were visited. That data is currently under review and should be published around the summer or fall of next year. And I've included a handout in your packets at your seats there, and then there's some more copies by the entrance over there if you would like to read those. And if you have any questions, I can bring those back and share them with the team. I'd also like to provide a brief update from our Assured Water Supply team. If the council is interested in hearing a full update from the Assured Water Supply group, please do let me know so we can work on adding them to the next agenda. So far in 2022, the department has received 3 applications for Assured Water Supply certificates and 1 application for a reissuance of a certificate of an assured supply in the Prescott AMA. The city of Prescott has submitted their application for redesignation. That application was submitted in December of 2021. It's currently under review. And just as a reminder, the city of Prescott is the only designated provider in the AMA. The Prescott Valley area has received applications that have depended upon the Prescott Valley effluent fiscal availability determination, and the use of that PAD requires subdivisions to return effluent to the town. When effluent is the source of water for those subdivisions, the subdivision is deemed consistent with the management goal. The department has had several applications in the Chino Valley vicinity that are coming in as dry lot subdivisions, which means there's no municipal water provider. And those are all small subdivisions. Chino Valley has applied for a physical availability determination to demonstrate physical availability in the Wineglass Ranch area, and that's in anticipation of transporting water from Big Chino into the AMA. And then last, I'd like to conclude my update by mentioning our legislative affairs page. It's on our website, the link is there.
Madam Chair, can you?
Absolutely, if it's okay with the AMA director.
Yeah,
Do you
sure.
want to take them as they come along?
Absolutely, yeah.
Could you go back to the previous slide? So how many of those applications or issuances were based off of a new allocation of groundwater that wasn't allocated prior to 1999?
I would not be able to answer that. I don't have that information from the Assured Water Supply group, but that's something we can look into and get back to you.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Thank you.
Could you real quick say the Chino Valley thing again?
Sure. It is, they applied for a physical availability determination to demonstrate physical availability in the Wine Glass Ranch area. And that's in anticipation of transporting from the Big Chino.
Okay. Did they do that?
They own water rights in that area. Sort of irrigated.
So we can, we'll have to explore that a little bit more later, maybe not at this time. But to follow, I thought that Chino Valley also had a PAD active within their town limits as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I know you're not the issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe there's some follow-up. I think what you're hearing is questions that are valid related to everybody has activities, increased activities with development happening. Some are based on old groundwater. I don't want to say allowances, but there's, depending on where you're sitting in the AMA, you have a different structure that you're working under. I do want to follow up real quickly. You do have one that says the phase, okay, this is a physical availability determined outside of the AMA. That's the one assigned to with Chino on this chart. Physical availability determined outside the AMA, that's Chino. The physical availability determination inside the AMA, do you happen to know?
Which one that is?
Yeah.
Let's see here. I do not know which one that is. That's pending.
Okay.
The only information I received from them is Chino Valley's applied for a physical availability determination.
Does it have a date?
No.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the members?
But I think it's worth having the issue water supply team present at the next meeting so we can work on that and have some of those questions explored in depth.
Okay, that'd be appreciated.
Sure. So concluding with the legislative affairs update, there's a link here on the slide. I just want to redirect everyone to that. I've shown it before, but I want to remind everyone that exists. We obviously had a very busy legislative session, which included the passing of SB 1740, which appropriated $3.5 million towards supply and demand assessments. That is something John will be talking about in depth here in a couple minutes. The budget also included $1 billion to the long-term augmentation fund and WIFA, and an additional $200 million were placed in a water conservation grant fund. Unfortunately, our legislative liaison, Ben Alternator, couldn't be here today, but additional information regarding the session can be found on that website, including some bill-specific information. We can also have Ben plan to present at the next meeting and provide some additional information on the $1 billion, $200 million. We're still very early in that and kind of doing our own research on where that's all going to come out. So we can plan on that being on the next agenda as well. And thank you for your time and attention. This concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Miller. I'll pause for any other questions that you may have in the group. I do have one more follow-up, the basin sweep. So we moved quickly and I was jotting as quickly as I could. So 147 wells, and then the publishing of that will be in summer.
Summer or fall of 2023?
23.
Yep. They said summer 2023 at the earliest. So.
Okay. And within this fact sheet that you gave us, is there information on, did they surpass what they're usually able to collect, or are they collecting less, or is that kind of?
They didn't provide that information. They said it was a successful basin sweep, so I imagine they were at least close to the goals.
Percentage that they typically
Right.
that they hit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on to agenda item number 4, groundwater withdrawal fee recommendation and WMAP update. So Ms. Lakes, go ahead and take it away for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, council members and members of the public. So I'll be going over the Water Management Assistance Program fund balance and the status of the Wmap and DCP groundwater conservation grants. So currently, our balance in the Prescott AMA is $107,923, and of that, $24,570 are committed, which would leave a balance of $83,722. Annually, we expect to collect about $17,000. There's currently one project outside of the ADOT project that's being funded with the WMAP funds, and that's the conservation webpage redesign project that was recently approved through this, for the city of Prescott for $10,000, and that contract is set to expire in August of next year. And I'll have to add some more in-depth updates for WMAP projects, if we could pull up the dashboard. I'll just go ahead and continue with this for the time being. For the WMAP project updates, our Prescott Conservation webpage redesign contract was recently executed, but it's currently in the process of signing an amendment just to correct some dates that were that are no longer able to be met. And so no deliverables have been submitted at this time. For the 3 projects that are under the Groundwater Conservation Grant Fund, we have the Prescott Valley Water Smart portal that has submitted 2 out of the 5 deliverables, and their most recent deliverable being a 1-year progress report. For our second contract, we have the rainwater harvesting for aquifer recharge project that submitted 1 out of 6 deliverables. Most recent being a percolation test results, engineering designs, and building permits. And we have the ADOT project for the SR State Route 89 dry well installation that has submitted 5 out of 9 deliverables, the most recent being our first semi-annual reporting tool or report. And we recently have launched a dashboard for the Water Management Assistance Program that gives more in-depth information regarding projects, the withdrawal fees in the area, how much is collected, as well as all the same information for the Groundwater Conservation Grant.
You might need to join.
Okay. Permission to share. Share. Okay. Okay. Let's start.
That is a cool dog.
Okay.
No, it's the city of Prescott.
I apologize for the delay there. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So this is our dashboard. It's not currently on our website, but it will be soon.
I can smell concern.
She's very good.
Thank you. I apologize for that delay there. So this is our Water Management Assistance Program dashboard. We have our first page. We'll go over the Water Management Assistance annual funding. So we have it broken down by AMA. So for Prescott, we can break it down here. We can see how much of the unobligated fund balance is available. We can see the WMAP fee, so that conservation fee for the withdrawals. We also see how much we're collecting each year. So this year we collected about 17,000 with that increase in the withdrawal fee. So when we go to the next page, this is all the projects that are currently under the Water Management Assistance Fund. And we also have our expenditures and encumbrances total. And then when we click on a project, it'll break it down. It'll show how much was awarded, the deliverables received, all the information that you can find in the contract. On our next page, very similar format. This is from that $2 million fund. So when you click on a any project, it'll show you all that. But this one also includes our impact of acre feet per year conserved, or the impact for people reached per year. Then we just have our notes and a quick little glossary. Are there any questions regarding the WMAP funds or groundwater conservation projects?
I'll check with the members. Any questions on this? I have a question actually. So with the, like, say the ADOT project, that was a significant fund expenditure that was made. Are we able to see the deliverables from that project online, or is it something we request to see?
At this point, it would be something that you can request from me, and I can send you over some of the deliverables. But that's something that I can work on getting on the website. For the WMAP projects, we do have deliverables available online. Right now, the groundwater conservation contract deliverables are not available online, but that's something that I can work on.
Well, I think this is a wonderful start, because then we always had to wait until a GUAC meeting or a call down there and wonder about how that funding might, what it might be looking like, and to do our planning, what might make sense for this area. That sounds great. First I'll back up and say, not only are you experts in the areas that you cover for the department, but you also have to tie in these electronics at the same time. So doing a great job. And then these features, in addition, are happening behind the scenes with your IT group, are very helpful to us in communication or information transfer. Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could follow on that, yeah, the ADOT project, I think, is the one that we have seen the least of. And I think we're pretty curious about what they're doing. I certainly am, if there's any way to gather something regarding what they've done, if they've built these detention basins or anything of the sort.
Yeah.
That's information I can definitely provide to you after the meeting, and like a little summary of what kind of work they have been doing, if you'd like.
And it wouldn't be just as valuable as those monies that went to Prescott Valley for their AMR. That information transfer could help the region to see how, that started and how it's going. So we kind of could see that. And then looks like the other, actually,
Yeah.
Would you be able to provide kind of enough, I know this was a short update here, but if there's anything that you can visually see that you can send out after the meeting?
Yes.
For each one of these, excluding the website one, because I think they're working on that in-house, as far as I understand. That would be great.
Okay.
I do have a quick question. When you look at this, does this mean that 2 out of the 3 have spent all their money on their projects, and ADOT's spent $67,444 out of the $75,000? Is that what that means? Yeah, is that?
This is from a special allocation, or this is.
I know what the funds are, but does this mean? What is that number?
So Ms. Sykes, I think he's, looking at the Wmap funds
Yes.
column, and then the total funding column.
Sure. So
Yeah.
for the Water Management Assistance Program, that fund it comes from a different funding source than the Groundwater Conservation Grant. The Groundwater Conservation Grant comes from that $2 million allocation, but some projects decided to fund the WMAP, or some GUACs decided to take some of the WMAP funds to fund these groundwater conservation grants, so you can have more projects. So that's where the $67,000 comes from for the State Route 89 project. So this is just their total amount. It's not what's left or how much they spent.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So if there's not any more questions of the group,
So good.
then let's go ahead and move to agenda 5. John Riggins will provide us with a statewide planning activities update. So thank you, Mr. Riggins, for being here, and,
Before we move on,
oh,
there is a second part to.
I'm
agenda
sorry, we have
four.
to actually vote on something.
We do, and I'll
Thank you,
kick that
sir.
off.
Okay, back up, we have more, part two.
Kennedy, can you pull up the Word document with the yellow highlighting? Perfect, thank you. So withdrawal fees for 2022 are set for $2 per acre foot, which remains the same from 2021. Of that $2 per acre foot, $1.25 goes towards the Water Management Assistance Program, and 75 cents goes towards administration and enforcement. Today, GUAC members are asked to make a recommendation to the director regarding the rate of withdrawal fees for reporting year 2023, which will be collected in 2024. And just as a reference, this table provides withdrawal fee rates and money collected from the past 5 years. And the highlighted sections on the far right are under 2023 are the withdrawal statutory fee frameworks. So the component of the fee that goes towards the Wmap, and that's money that's set aside for conservation, augmentation, and research of water availability in the AMA, cannot exceed $2 per acre foot. And the admin and enforcement component can be between 50 cents and $1 per acre foot. So yeah, before asking the members to make a recommendation, I'll gladly answer any questions I can.
Members of that, this is probably familiar, I think, to everyone sitting at this table, and those of us who actually had file annual reports to the state. Do you have any discussion regarding the fee as it is now, what we would potentially like to see for 2023? Member Munderloh.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I noticed that, it went into effect for 2021, the extra quarter towards Wmap funding, and that impacted administration and enforcement without increasing the overall fee collected. So I see that increase for our benefit there. I think it's a pretty good formula as it stands.
Any other members?
I had a question,
Member Holt?
and, yeah, and then I'll make a recommendation as well. Is this the same time of the year that we do this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah, they're set by October 1st.
okay,
So
just want to make sure about
yeah.
that.
Last year we set them, I think August 18th was the meeting that we set the fees.
Okay.
So,
And I think I agree with John. I don't see need necessarily to change that from the current year to next year. But if any members did have a recommendation different, we can certainly discuss.
And I'll follow with one question, and then we can seek a recommendation to approve. With your administration and enforcement fee, can you remind this group what that's used for and
Sure.
how often it's used?
Sure. So the administration and enforcement fee goes into the water resources account, which is kind of a pretty broad account that the department uses for everything from salary, paying for vehicles to do field services stuff. It's a pretty broad account that's used for a variety of things in the department.
Okay, so are we aware of any enforcement activities that have happened in this area? And what would they necessarily be if it was, if it moves from the admin over to the enforcement? I know that sometimes there's been questions about how wells were drilled, or do you still, if you still send teams up to verify complaints?
We do, and we are increasing some of our inspections. So for a long time, the AMA section wasn't able to get out in the field and go to these places and do inspections. We relied a little bit more on the compliance team. We are going to start, for example, going out and talking to a municipal provider and looking at their reports, and maybe going to a farm, doing a little bit more of the kind of in-person inspections that we hadn't been able to do in the past.
Thanks, Director Miller. Okay. Doesn't sound like we have any deviation, so I'll accept some kind of formalize how you would like to proceed.
Want to make a motion? Is that what we need?
Yes, sir.
I'll make a motion that we accept the fees as stated in the program as presented.
As
That-
water management.
Whatever appropriate wording is.
Okay. That we remain the same for 2023 as shown for 2022.
Recommend that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Small group. Any other discussion? Okay,
Thank you.
we have PSET. Thank you for pulling us back, so we didn't miss the piece that you wanted to make sure you had from us before October. You're doing a great job, because we're ahead of schedule, it sounds like.
Can I ask a question?
Are we allowed to entertain along the way? Okay. Yes, please. Please identify who you are and please follow with your question.
Yeah, this is Peter Krupnik. My question is, when you do these inspections, do you sample the well or just look at the physical structures?
When field services goes out to wells, they'll usually measure the depth to water. I'm not aware of any sampling beyond that, but typically they're measuring depth to water, that kind of thing.
Mr. Krupnik?
Thank you.
Are you asking about wells that are drilled and maybe they're not constructed properly? That's where my question was going. Or are you asking about the sampling that their basic data section does on wells, water levels, and sometimes grab samples on water quality?
Well, there are many older wells, maybe even younger, that are not completed properly, could be sucking in surface waters, ending up contaminated. So that's my question is really what they're looking for.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Thanks. So it would depend upon what the reason we were out there. If we were responding to a complaint of a well not constructed properly or something along those lines, then that's a different inspection versus doing a depth to water check. And in that case, we would look at how the well was constructed and move from there. Okay. And John would like to add.
Yes.
As the former compliance officer for the agency, I would say too, if there were any quality concerns or if there were any issues of contamination brought up in the complaint, we would partner with DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, on that complaint as well, which we have in the past, and they've gone out and sampled, and, but that would be more under their purview. But we definitely would check for well construction standards under our scope and our regulatory authority.
Okay.
Madam Chair, before we get to the next agenda item, there is a question in the chat from Nicholas Bachman. Nicholas wants to know, where can information be found on Arizona Department of Transportation's SR 89 stormwater recharge Highland project?
So that information can be found on the Water Management Assistance page. And I'll drop that link in the meeting chat.
That's all the questions in the chat at this point.
Thank you. Okay, yep, we're juggling to multiple areas. Okay, and now we'll move to agenda item number 5. Mr. Riggins, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, council members. Again, my name is John Riggins. I'm the statewide planning manager at ADWR. Thank you for having me. I'm going to be providing a brief overview of the new supply and demand assessment that was a provision in the recently passed Senate Bill 1740. My team in statewide planning is going to be collaborating very closely with the department's AMA team, as well as other programs within the department on this new supply and demand assessment. And we're excited to get things started. So I'll be providing a brief overview of our plan going forward. I will say one note before I really get started, that we are still in the very early stages of developing the process to meet the requirements for the supply and demand assessment. Therefore, some procedural questions that you may have likely may still be in development that we're working through internally. But I did want to say that I would be able to provide updates on that process in subsequent council meetings. So if that's something you'd like, I could certainly provide that. So this is a quote from Governor Ducey from the DCP legislation signing in 2019. And as we know, it still holds true today. We were met with the same challenges. We are over 20 years into a historically worsening drought, emphasizing the need to continue Arizona's innovative and forward thinking when it comes to water resources. So Senate Bill 1740 was one of the last acts passed into law from the recent legislative session, and it expands the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, also known as WIFA. WIFA will continue to fund and design and construction of water infrastructure projects, but will also have new duties to pursue augmentation and conservation projects with a new board structure appointed jointly by the legislature and the governor. So what I'm here today to brief on is a provision in Senate Bill 1740, which requires ADWR to conduct a rolling 5-year supply and demand assessment of each groundwater basin in the state. This, as you see on the slide here, is the new provision in Title 45, which is the Department statutes outlining the requirement to analyze and prepare a water supply and demand assessment for at least 6 groundwater basins every year, with all the basins having a supply and demand assessment completed once every 5 years. These are the new provisions in Title 49 of Arizona Revised Statutes, which outline the scope of the newly reconstructed WIFA. These provisions explain the purpose of the supply and demand assessment as they relate to WIFA's evaluation of water supply development projects. WIFA shall consider the information contained in the supply and demand assessments conducted and developed by ADWR pursuant to ARS 45-105, which is the new supply and demand provision and statute. Here are some of the previous assessment studies involving ADWR. These ones primarily are for the state's 5 active management areas. These studies looked at historical water demand and supply characteristics for the AMAs for a determined time frame. In addition, the assessment calculated various water supply and demand projection scenarios for the AMAs. There's also a link included to the assessments, which are archived on the ADWR AMA website. So in order to analyze the state's water use and develop an estimate, we have historically considered data sets from various sources. As you see from the slide, the AMA data is derived from the reported data provided by the various water use sectors. We also include water use estimates from the USGS for groundwater basins around the state, many of which are outside of the state's 5 active management areas. We also include community water systems reported data for municipal water use outside of the state's AMAs. And I will say too that our community water systems program recently developed a new dashboard that includes a lot of great data that is reported to the department. I don't have a link here, but I will try to provide one to this council afterwards. So all of these sources, as you see, help the department develop a statewide water use estimate. If you attended any of our water resources meetings in the past few years, you'll likely be familiar with this slide, which illustrates the compilation of the last slide's data sources into our statewide water use estimates. Again, this is derived from various reported and estimated water uses from around the state. So that brings us to the how. How are we going to complete this new supply and demand assessment pursuant to the new provision in ARS? The statewide planning team has been working with the AMA team to collaborate and develop our plan for accomplishing these new requirements. This includes the process of bringing in new staff and hiring new staff to help ADWR accomplish these tasks. We are currently posting for a new supply and demand analyst, an AMA data specialist, and a statewide planning stakeholder outreach coordinator. We're developing our initial data sets, the initial groundwater basins for analysis, and initial assumptions to include. We will immediately begin our planning process. Well, we immediately began our planning process in July once the new act was signed into law. And we're taking the next few months to develop these planning standards and hire staff so we can hit the ground running with our initial basin assessment, starting immediately in the calendar year 2023. Here's some considerations for scenarios and assumptions for the supply and demand side of the analysis. I will say that we are currently in the internal process of working jointly among our teams and with various programs in ADWR to determine the details of the assessment process, and more information will be forthcoming as we develop the standards and practices of the assessment. So I'll leave you with this quote from Director Bishotsky. So given the challenges facing the state and continuing drought, we're at a point where we need an all-of-the-above approach to addressing these water challenges. This means doing more with the water supply that we have, while also identifying new augmentation strategies and conservation projects through the new reconstructed WIPA. The supply and demand assessment will be an important component of that process. With that, I will take any questions. I also just briefly, and I don't have any slides for it, but just a quick recap of the last Governor's Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Council meeting. They last met on June 28th, and the director provided a pretty extensive update on the Colorado River. Our legislative liaison provided extensive recap of the legislative session. And currently we have not set a date for the next meeting. We'll keep you all updated on any meeting information or new dates as those are set. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Regan. Members, yeah, Mr. Holt, Member Holt.
I thought it was interesting that the presentation was kind of bracketed by the comments of the governor at the start, which identified a boundless future, versus the director's comments, which were a little bit more restrictive. I'd like to go back to slide number 18, please. I just want to make certain that I'm understanding this. That of the 46 groundwater basins, there are 6, at least 6, that will be, an annual report will be produced. Does that include the 5 active management areas and
Yes.
then 1 additional basin?
That will include the 5 active management areas.
Okay. Okay, that's what I thought, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
I didn't know if those basins were in addition to the AMAs or if that is the AMAs.
So yes, this reflects the 46 groundwater basins outside the AMAs, but it will also include the AMAs themselves.
Okay. That's all I had. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Another member
I
question?
have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The director's comments seem a little ominous to me. And I'm wondering, are they directed more toward the issues with the Colorado River as the major issue about concern about water in Arizona, or are there other factors going on that he had to make that statement that we might have to make choices in the future about how we're using water?
Well, Council Member, Madam Chair, I would say that I can't speak to the director's comments. That would be a question for him, but I would say that we are facing challenges on several fronts: Colorado River, groundwater, the drought. I think it's a matter of all of those.
The big picture.
The big picture, correct.
Okay.
I'd like to have a moment to ask a couple questions too. I wanted to look back at slide 22, what's now pretty famous chart used. It just said quite a bit. So, when I look at this chart, I see that there's been conservation efforts. So we're able to do, serve more with less water, but you can see that now in 2019, they're right on top of each other. So if we continue to have the orange line go up and the blue line go down, where do we seek, what I saw at that time was there was some cushion we could work into conservation efforts municipally. There could be conservation efforts in agriculture. So where are we looking next? I know that it's an all play, everybody has to contribute, but right now those points are right on top of each other. And so if one continues one trend and the other continues another, less use, I guess that could be a good thing, but I'm concerned, I'll just stop there. I think my point is we had a cushion, we've moved up the population line, we've been able to use less. where's that cushion in the future? For
Madam-
time?
No, Madam Chair, great question. I think, one of the big highlights of this bill, this new law, is that it is also appropriating a lot of money, over $1 billion to Water Infrastructure Finance Authority to facilitate, and one of those includes $200 million for the Conservation Grant Fund. So I think that is definitely recognized, and back to the, we're, along with seeking new augmentation strategies, whatever that may be, one of the big things is doing a lot more with water that we do have. So I think that addresses that cushion or that goal, but we're certainly facing a lot of challenges. So something like this with the new expansion of WIPA and the supply and demand assessment and our collaboration on that, I think is going to help pave a way for the state to be able to meet those challenges.
Thank you. No. Any other questions here? So my next question is, I know that you're working on putting a plan together, and I totally appreciate that. You had a lot dropped on your lap, a lot to get done with this Senate bill. Are there some initial thoughts on how you will queue up the first 6 to 8? We know there's challenges in the Wilcox area. We know there's challenges in the Kingman area. What's going to help drive some of those things, do you think? Choices?
Good question, Madam Chair. I think right now, initially, obviously those areas of the state where there are those challenges, we're certainly looking at those, but we're talking internally and working with the director on identifying which basins that we will include in the first assessment as well as in the subsequent assessments for the following years. So that is certainly something that we're looking at and actively discussing. I don't know if it was the last bill signed or put into effect, but it was very close to it. So we've been meeting kind of immediately as it was signed to discuss and have those internal conversations. So hopefully I'll be able to provide a better, clearer picture of that process and what our plan is moving forward at subsequent meetings.
Thank you, and for everything. Another follow-up, would those help in the ranking for the fund distribution as well? If you have an area of the state that seems to need attention faster, would that rank them higher for those conservation monies potentially? Is that, this Senate Bill 1740 had a bunch of other boards that were going to be formed for things, but does that play into it at all, do you think?
Madam Chair, so the new board, I think part of the discussions that we will be having internally will also include those with their current staff, their executive director and others, to determine what role we will play in that. A lot of the authority for these projects in determining the criteria and prioritization, that's going to be left up to the new WIPA board. So I think initially we are going to have some conversations about how our process will interact with what they are doing. So that is going to be a key component as well.
New partnerships.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item from the members? No? We're good? Online? Okay. Have to look over instructions. Okay, so let's move ahead to agenda item number 6, overdraft, Safefield, and the management goals in the active management areas. And Ms. Long, please walk us through this piece.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the council. Again, my name is Amanda Long. I'm the AMA planning manager, and I worked pretty extensively on this analysis. So I'm going to talk to you about the department and overdraft and Safefield analysis method and the results specific to the Prescott AMA. So I'll walk through the analysis that's presented in these 2 documents. So the first is the overdraft, Safefield, and the management goals of Arizona's active management areas report. This report summarizes the current method of assessing Safefield in each AMA or its goal, including the process that AWR used to get to that method, and the current status of the management goal in each AMA. Parts of the report were then were then pulled out into Chapter 2 of each of the 5 management plans. So the presentation that I'm going to go through will follow the general outline on the left-hand side of the slide. I'll mostly concentrate on those 4 kind of sub-bullets, and I'll use the overdraft dashboard to talk about the results for the Prescott AMA. So I will start with the definition, the statutory definition of Safefield. So it's the groundwater management goal, which attempts to achieve and thereafter maintain a long-term balance between the annual amount of groundwater withdrawn in an active management area and the annual amount of natural and artificial recharge in the active management area. So it's the management goal for the Prescott, Phoenix, and Tucson AMA to achieve it by 2025. And it's also one part of the Santa Cruz AMA goal. So Safefield analyses have been included in every management plan, or discussions have been included in every management plan. However, the analyses from the first to the fourth have been fairly inconsistent. Past plans didn't include all the same things in the discussion. Depending on the AMA and depending on the plan, they sometimes included annual water budgets over time. Sometimes the potential for Safefield under various scenarios or projections was included. Sometimes there was a list of impediments to Safefield. And sometimes the actual status of Safefield wasn't actually included in the plan. So for the development of the 5th management plan, we wanted to create and develop a clear and consistent method for assessing Safefield, and then also create a method for communicating that to the public, the regulated community, and also water professionals. So we did this through the management plans work group process. This was the AWR-led stakeholder process for the development of the plan. The general goals of the work group were to assess, update, and develop conservation programs for the 5th management plan. And this group convened around mid to late 2019 to early 2021. So in this process, 5 subgroups were created, including one for the technical discussion of Safefield. So at the beginning of the Safefield technical subgroup, it was largely educational. We spent a lot of time looking at existing data and the statute and answering questions about what Safefield was. And through this process, we got a pretty good understanding, or better understanding at least, of what some of the misconceptions were and where clarity was needed. So this slide summarizes some of that discussion. The statutory definition here in the middle may look quite short and simple, but it can be quite complex to understand. So through these discussions in the subgroup, we were able to talk through a lot of these complexities. So on the left, I'll describe quickly what Safefield is, and then I have a couple of slides after where I'll keep going on what Safefield is. And then on the right is some of the misconceptions that we heard through the subgroup. So we'll start on the left. Safefield in statute is defined and has 3 parts, which I highlighted in purple in the middle. So first is the annual calculation of what is being withdrawn and recharged into the AMA in every year. The second is the long-term balance of those annual inflows. And then the third, and this one's often missed actually, is the maintenance of that long-term balance once it's achieved. And I'll move over to the right. Oh, sorry, I'm still on the left. So Safefield is also an AMA level goal. It's not specific to any sector or city. All sectors have a role in contributing to Safefield. Safefield is also solely focused on groundwater, and it only applies to what is legally considered groundwater. So what that means is not all water that's under the ground is actually considered groundwater. For example, effluent that's stored underground when it's withdrawn is accounted for as also effluent, so we wouldn't consider that in the calculation for Safefield. And then the final piece here, that last bullet on the left, the statute definition says attempts to achieve. So what that means is Safefield does not have to be met at all costs. So now I'll move over to the right, which is kind of a list of the common misconceptions we heard in the Safefield subgroup of what Safefield is. So the first is Safefield is not a specific set volume. We were often asked, what is the number? What will it take us to get to Safefield? And because inflows and outflows can change every year, if we were to set a target, it would kind of be a moving one. So there isn't necessarily one volume that would get us to Safefield in every year. The second one there, Safefield is also not a measure of aquifer health. Although reaching Safefield would certainly help, it is a budget calculation that we do on paper. It doesn't indicate what the water levels of the aquifer are or say anything else about the important indicators of aquifer health. In that same vein, Safefield does not mean that water withdrawals cannot happen so long as that groundwater is recharged in the long term. The fourth one there, and we heard this one quite a bit too, Safefield does not solve cumulative overdraft. So cumulative overdraft is the sum of all historical overdraft that's occurred over time. Safefield would not solve this for geologic and for practical reasons. To restore the aquifer and reverse all historical overdraft wouldn't be geologically possible, excuse me, because the storage capacity may no longer be the same due to subsidence. It's also not practical to replace all the historical groundwater that's been withdrawn because the volume is simply too large. So Safefield would slow and halt long-term overdraft and preserve the groundwater for the future, but it might not fix the cumulative overdraft of the past. And then finally, and this is a pretty big misconception, and I'll spend the next 2 slides talking about this, but the Safefield calculation is not the same as overdraft. Although they're very, very related, they are not quite the same concept. Although overdraft is one component of Safefield, and it's necessary to look at it to be able to assess Safefield. So first I'll talk here about the overdraft calculation, and then I'll move over to explain Safefield a little bit more. So the overdraft calculation is quantitative and compares inflows and outflows to and from the aquifer in a specific time frame. So according to statute, we'll look at the annual time frame and then also the long-term time frame. It's also groundwater focused and at the AMA level. And you can get 2 results from the overdraft calculation. So on the left is a condition of overdraft, which is when the outflows are greater than the inflows. And then on the right is a condition of balance, which is when the inflows are greater than the outflows. And so that would mean there's a balance and there's no overdraft. So in contrast, Safefield is both quantitative and qualitative. Achieving Safefield would mean there is no overdraft or a balance condition in the long-term time frame, and that long-term balance is maintained into the future. So what this means is you can have several years of annual overdraft and still be in Safefield if those are eventually balanced out by other years of recharge. You can also have several years in balance and not be at Safefield if there's a lot of overdraft in other years. You can also be at a long-term balance, but also not be at Safefield if that condition can't be maintained into the future. So to get to a method that assesses Safefield, we first, and I'm at the bottom of the slide here, we first must look at the annual inflows and outflows, or the annual overdraft calculation. And then we'll look at what those annual calculations mean in the long term. And then we'll pull that all together with other factors that might allow or prevent the maintenance of a long-term balance. So with all that said, I'll move back to the Safefield technical subgroup. So what I just talked about in those slides are how we form the basis of the goals for the technical subgroup. And again, I've highlighted kind of the pieces in purple to align with the statutory goal. So the first is the annual overdraft portion, to go through each of the components in the annual overdraft calculation, how each component is calculated, if anything needs to be added or updated, and to make sure that this is done in a clear and consistent way. The second is to develop a long-term overdraft or balance calculation. So long-term is used in statute, but it's not defined what that time frame is. So part of our goal is to develop a way to assess and define that. And then the third one is to bring together the annual piece, the long-term piece with other qualitative factors to determine whether Safefield could be achieved and then also maintained into the future. And then part of that last goal also was to come up with a way to be able to communicate this to various audiences. So to do this, we had several meetings and we created a development dashboard, which can still be found on the concepts page that's linked there on the slide. We developed several proposals for each of those 3 goals, And then we put that onto the development dashboard to allow stakeholders to explore the data. So I'm not going to walk through all the proposals because there's quite a few of them, and this is already a pretty long presentation. But I will give an overview of the final methods and what the results look like for the Prescott AMA. So I will, back up one. I'll start with the first goal, which is the annual overdraft calculation. So the calculation itself is quite straightforward. We subtract the annual outflows from the annual inflows, and the results of that could be an overdraft condition or a condition of balance. So all the components of the annual calculation are listed on the screen. We spent the bulk of the subgroup going through every single component, determining how it was calculated and if that calculation needs to be updated, if the component itself should or should not be included in the calculation, and if there were components that should be included that were not. The components are broadly categorized into natural or artificial. So natural being ones that are naturally occurring, stream flow, and then artificial are ones that are more human caused, so things like groundwater demand. The components were generally derived from annual reports data or from the regional groundwater flow model. The blue are from the model, the ones highlighted in blue, and then the ones highlighted in gray are from annual reports. So as a result of the discussions in the subgroup, we did adjust how a couple of the components were derived. Notably for Prescott, municipal incidental recharge was not previously included. So that's something we adjusted for this analysis. So using the final updated dashboard here to show some of the results. So this is for the Prescott AMA. This only includes the final method and all the adjustments that we made. So this shows all the individual inflow and outflow components over time. There's quite a few of them. It's a little bit difficult to look at. So if we go to the next slide here, we just have it aggregated up so that we can more easily look at the results. So the dark teal are the outflows and the light teal are the inflows. The y-axis is in acre feet, and then the x-axis is years starting at 1985. And then the black line on the screen there is the results of the annual overdraft calculation every year. So that line under the 0 mark would be a state of balance, and then over that line would be overdraft. So you can see the data for the Prescott AMA is really quite variable. There's a lot of years that are in overdraft, but there's also quite a few years where there's quite a bit of recharge. So it's difficult here to see any long-term results. So for the second goal, we wanted to be able to look at the annual data in the long term without masking any progress that's been made towards Safefield or any lack of progress that's made towards the goal. So we did go through several different methods for this, including choosing a specific time frame, looking at this only by sector, adjusting it for specific influences, and these you can all find. These methods are still available on the concepts page. So what we ended up doing was actually fairly simple. We knew that artificial components like groundwater demands tended to follow shorter cycles, whereas natural components tended to follow longer cycles. So what we did is we took a 3-year running average of all the artificial components, and then a 20-year running average of all the natural components. And so what we get, as you can see, is a line that's a lot smoother and will provide us with kind of a long-term overdraft or balance number in every year. So similar to the annual graph here, the dark purple are the outflows over time, and the light purple are the inflows over time. So again, you can see that for the Prescott AMA, this line is significantly smoother and quite a bit easier to look at. It does show that the Prescott AMA is in a state of long-term overdraft for every single year. So the last part of the statutory definition of Safefield is whether or not the AMA would be able to achieve and thereafter maintain a long-term balance in the Safefield. So we did this actually qualitatively, thinking about the major factors contributing to Prescott achieving and maintaining Safefield. This is something that could be done quantitatively, but doing so would have a high level of uncertainty given the time that we had and the staff resources that we had available. Projections have been done in the past, but they have been fairly quickly updated. So this is something that we want to look at for the supply and demand assessments that John talked about previously, but it wasn't done for this specific exercise. So for the Prescott AMA, to achieve and maintain Safefield, there's some supply and demand considerations. On the demand side, population growth, particularly growth that's outside the Assured Water Supply Authority, is something that could prevent Safefield, as well as the demands from exempt wells. We know exempt well use is high and growing in the Prescott AMA, but those demands are exempt from reporting, so we can only estimate the extent of that. But in the Prescott AMA, the factors preventing Safefield are actually largely supply focused. The first one there, Prescott relies fairly heavily on groundwater. The Prescott AMA also does have some surface water, but the amount is small and can be quite variable over time. And then the biggest concern for the Prescott AMA is the lack of imported supplies. We know it's possible to import supplies to Prescott in the future from Big Chino, but the uncertainty to the volume and the timing on this is something that's a concern. Back to the slide again, the second part of that final goal was to put together all of the quantitative and qualitative pieces together into a comprehensive assessment. And so to do this, we created a communication strategy, and it's summarized in 2 pages of the dashboard. And based on the subgroup discussions, we were told that we should have 2 different strategies for this, for 2 different audiences. One for the general public, so those with a little bit less water knowledge, and then those for a more technical audience, water professionals, experts in that community. So for the general audience, we wanted that to be a little bit more educational, with the high level status for each AMA. So the idea here is that the reader of this wouldn't be getting into the weeds of the data, but rather just coming to see what the actual status is. So this dashboard has the infographics that I used earlier, defining overdraft and Safefield. And then on the right hand is just a high level summary of the management goal for each of the AMAs. Using the most current year data, which for us is 2019 right now. So for the Prescott AMA, although Safefield could be possible under certain scenarios, the AMA is not at Safefield and not expected to achieve Safefield given current practices and conditions. For the technical group, we want to take that small blurb at the end and expand on it. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here walking through each of these columns. We initially proposed a technical method for assessing Safefield. We proposed a bunch of single quantitative metrics that were based on the annual and long-term calculations. And we got 2 main pieces of feedback. The first was that one single metric wasn't going to do it. And the second was that the metrics needed to be both quantitative and qualitative for various different types of audiences. So we came up with several quantitative and qualitative metrics that utilize both the annual and long-term calculations that I described a little bit earlier in the presentation. So on the bottom of this dashboard, you can filter it by AMA and by management period. And once you click on those 2 items, it will tell you which year of the long-term overdraft, sections are referring to. So I'm going to walk through each of these here. The first is the annual overdraft metric. This uses the annual overdraft calculation, and it's qualitative. So this tells us if there are more annual years in overdraft or in balance. So an X here would mean that there is more years in overdraft. The check would be more years in balance. So for the Prescott AMA, there are more annual years of overdraft than in balance from 1985 to 2019. So the next 2 columns use the long-term overdraft calculation. The middle one that I'll talk about next is quantitative. The one that's boxed right now is a qualitative interpretation of the quantitative numbers. So the status metric tells us whether or not in the year that's listed, the AMA is in long-term overdraft. So an X would indicate long-term overdraft, where a check would mean balance. So for the Prescott AMA in 2019, it's in a state of long-term overdraft. The next metric called direction helps us to understand the progress that's being made towards or away from Safefield. So this is in recognition that even though an AMA is in long-term overdraft, decreasing overdraft would indicate a trend towards balance and then a trend towards the goal. So for this box, an X would mean a trend towards more overdraft, a check would mean a trend towards more balance. And then for the Prescott AMA, a blank box here is not a really clear trend either way. So then the middle column here, the next three metrics are all quantitative results of the long-term overdraft calculation. So the first one there, the single year metric, is the volume of long-term overdraft in the most recent year. So this metric attempts to partially answer the question of how far is the AMA from a long-term balance. So in the Prescott AMA, to get to a long-term balance in 2019, it would require an additional recharge volume of 17,000 acre-feet. The next two metrics below are given in percentages to give some context to that single year number. So the middle one there is the volume of overdraft as a percentage of the AMA's groundwater demand. And then the bottom is the volume of water as a percentage of the AMA's total demand. So for the Prescott AMA, although the volume itself is quite small at 17,000, it does represent a significant portion of the total demand and the total groundwater demand in the Prescott AMA. So the next column summarizes the maintenance part of the statutory definition. I included a lot more in that previous slide, but for the dashboard, we are just going to include the biggest one. And the biggest obstacle for the Prescott AMA is the lack of imported water supplies. And then finally, and we've seen this part already, this is the high level status of the management goal in the AMA. So again, for Prescott, the Safefield goal has not been met. So I'll end today with resources for everything that I just talked about. The 5MP concepts page on the top left there covers all the proposals that we looked at leading up to this report and through the 5MP working process. It also includes the developmental dashboard. In the middle there is the report where all this is summarized, and as well as the dashboard that supplements it. I used quite a few of the snapshots from the dashboard today, but it is an interactive dashboard that you can click around and explore the data with. And then the fit management plan for the Prescott AMA is there up on the side. And my contact information is on the screen here. I think Natalie Mass is also online to help answer questions, and we'd be happy to take any.
Thank you, Ms. Long. Covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
You did a nice job. It's a big topic to cover. Members, any? Yeah, number one below.
I have one. So Ms. Long, I appreciate that at the beginning of the presentation, you made it clear that overdraft and Safefield are not the same thing. And yet when you go into the overdraft dashboard calculation, you basically conflate the two. And in the Prescott AMA, they are quite different. If you go to slide 42 or 44 or any of the other slides where you have the definition of Safefield, go to the definition of Safefield there. And the definition of Safefield says that we have to maintain a balance between the amount of groundwater withdrawn. Yet in the overdraft dashboard, you include in the overdraft the amount of natural outflows. Natural outflows from the AMA occurring either as groundwater outflow or spring outflow are included as overdraft. But the Safefield definition says that we only have to account for groundwater withdrawn. So the overdraft calculation is inflated by the amount of natural outflows. So overdraft in the Prescott AMA is a lot different than Safefield per the definition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so this was something that we did get a comment on in the Safefield technical subgroup. And how we looked at that was the groundwater that was being removed from the aquifer. And we are also looking at net natural recharge, which would include natural outflows from the aquifer as well.
But net natural outflow is not groundwater withdrawal.
I think that it's still included in that second part of the definition though. The natural,
It says the amount of natural and artificial recharge. It doesn't say discharge, it says recharge.
right.
So I think there's it's kind of a discontinuity here in how these numbers are approached, particularly in the Prescott AMA, where the natural outflow is a pretty big part of our groundwater balance.
Right.
And it wasn't considered, regardless of whether it's appropriate or not, I'm not discussing that, but the definition of Safefield in the law, the legislature was looking at groundwater withdrawals as something that could be managed by those doing withdrawals, right? We can manage those withdrawals. We cannot manage natural outflow. So that's why the definition speaks to groundwater withdrawals as in pumping of groundwater, not natural outflow. So when we have this communication strategy, then communicating, and this is why this is an important issue for me, because it scares the bejesus out of people to see all of a sudden we've been looking at the Prescott AMA. You look at all the previous calculations. You look at ADWR's most recent groundwater modeling report from, I think it was last summer, Nelson and Younger, right? Is that the latest model? And they're talking to long-term overdraft numbers of around 8,000 acre feet because they did not include, as I recall, the discharge in the calculation. So we've also doubled kind of the response that is required from the AMA as a whole to reach Safefield. If you, again, conflate overdraft and Safefield, which you've done. It's quite confusing. It's quite confusing for the public. It's confusing for me, even being, a 35-year professional on the field. So it's difficult for us to sit here and look at your communication strategy. That to me is very confusing as to what is supposed to be our response. Is it 17,000 acre feet or is it more what we've been looking at for the past, 4 management plans prior to this one at around 8 to 10,000 acres. So, it's a comment more than a question, but I don't see how you've gone, kind of made this big leap on conflating Safefield and overdraft.
Maybe it's okay to follow on this one.
Leslie, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. On the very last slide, on the last little box, it said we can't, all the way to the very end, although it could possibly, I can't read, although it could I guess you say be possible to reach Safefield under certain limited scenarios with current practices and conditions, the Prescott AMA is not expected to achieve safe yield. My question is, limited scenarios, other than importing water from the Big Chino, what other scenarios are there?
That's the big one.
So there aren't limited, there's just a scenario.
I mean, it would be various scenarios, including the Big Chino, but certain different volumes, I guess, from Big Chino and different timing. So it would be multiple scenarios, including about the Big Chino transfers.
Okay.
Would not one of those circumstances be extraordinary natural recharge to the aquifer as a result of non-drought conditions?
I think that could be a scenario. I don't think it's something we've considered as this, but it could be one of the scenarios if we did get a lot of recharge. I mean, there have been a lot of years, as you can see in that first annual graph, where there was a significant amount of recharge. I think 93 was the really big year for LMAs. So if we had a lot of years like that, it could be a condition where Safefield would be possible.
Because much of our groundwater overdraft is in fact the lack of natural recharge that we've been experiencing as a result of drought conditions, correct?
Correct, yeah. We did actually have several conversations with the hydrologists that helped us with this. And we were talking about the inflows and the outflows of the natural without artificial. And we were a little bit concerned about some of those results. And the way he explained it to us is it's not a static model. So if more recharge were to happen, it would impact the rest of the model. If more groundwater withdrawals were to happen, it would impact the rest of the model. So there are situations where.
And I think that it's easy to make the assumption that extraordinary or unbridled growth in the active management area is what is responsible for the aquifer overdraft that we're experiencing. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's a combination perhaps of growth, but our growth is more efficient in its water use than it was previously. But the extraordinary lack of natural precipitation, which has effectively cut off any natural recharge back to the aquifer, doesn't seem like that people understand that connection as well. There's kind of a half of a story that's kind of not necessarily being told, but there's kind of an understanding of only a part of the story. Does that make sense too?
Mm-hmm. Water's all connected.
Yeah, it's all connected.
To caveat off of that, is there any way you can calculate, if we went back to normal without drought, is there any way you can calculate what that difference is and how it would affect the AMA in a general sense?
So we haven't done that for this exercise, but that is something we'd like to look at for the supply and demand assessments. Because with that, we'll have more staff resources and more time to be able to explore more scenarios. So that's something that we would like to look at.
And did you say 1993 was the last
I believe that was there was several years. I think 1993 was a very big year for recharge.
Okay.
I could be getting that incorrectly, but I believe it's around the early 90s.
Yeah.
83, 93 were big years. Yeah.
Maybe in chart 43, maybe.
It was that teal one.
Yeah, we'll go back to 43, or 41. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it looks like 2005 also.
One more comment, and that's a number of the management plans for the Prescott AMA have offered, I think, a pretty satisfactory explanation for the influence of the declaration of groundwater mining in this AMA. And I think that understanding is lacking as well. And as you recall, the department made a preliminary declaration of groundwater mining that wasn't made final until after a huge number of newly subdivided lots were granted preliminary plat approval, which essentially grandfathered them in as if they had an allocation to renewable supply of groundwater, and they didn't. It in fact cooked a lot of overdraft into the situation that I think that we find ourselves in now. Could that have been done differently? Probably not, but it was an interesting part of history that people also need to kind of remember as well.
So I guess a couple questions, maybe a couple comments. You know, 3 of the 4 of us sitting here lived through the declaration that happened here, and I was coming in just as it was being made. Working in a different part of the state, but knowing what was going on up here. What I think I'm hearing is a little bit of help in tailoring this discussion or this outreach a little bit more. I know that we have the same conditions, say down in the Santa Cruz AMA, it just operates different. It's a smaller basin. We're working with a smaller pond, less supplies, interactions that are happening in the metropolitan areas. So to different members' comments, I'm hearing, is that a possibility? Is this going to be tailored anymore into the future? Are there discussions like that where we can look at what's leaving, natural discharges, and how that affects these numbers? Some of the history of what's happened over the years to see if we can, it's an old term, but dial it in a little bit more, to help us in the decisions that we have to make up here as well. So from your standpoint, you have a set of regulatory items that you can bring forward to us, and questions that I'm hearing, like, what else is there? What other scenario can we talk about besides importation? I've seen also with the Bureau of Reclamation, in their work that they've done appraisal level studies, and I don't know how familiar, I think some of us are really familiar with those, is they knew that there was going to be multiple things that were going to have to fit together. Leachino is just one of those that just looks like the windfall situation, like if you bring in water, but there's probably going to have to be other things as well. And I would hope for, even in following this all these years, the visual that you provide on 48. Is there any way to provide a little more, and maybe you have it somewhere on the website, a little more background as to what you're looking at? When I see an X versus a check mark, I wouldn't know the difference necessarily. So you said, okay, well, an X there on annual overdraft means that there's more annual years in overdraft from 1985 to 2019. I don't think I would have known it was for the whole time period. So like, it might need a little more footnoting. I think that definitely seeing a 105%, that throws, everybody's thinking, well, wait a minute, how are we over 100%? So there's some discussion there that might help the reader, even a reader who's been in the business for a while. And then the last one, and I heard you say this, and I think there's room to type this in, and the statement that Member Recker mentioned, you had said, not expected to achieve safe yield. And that's in the general public discussion as well as the technical. And so that sounds like we have no idea what we're going to do. You followed it with given current practices and conditions, and just a little bit more verbiage, I think, would be helpful. So, right. You're not ever going to reach it, so everybody gives up, but that little piece that you gave today, if that could be added, that might be very helpful, I think, into the future. So I think that's my comments. But I don't know if there's actually any questions in there.
I can address a couple of them.
Sure.
If that's all right with you.
Sure.
This is a snapshot of the dashboard. If you do go to the actual dashboard, you actually hover over a lot of those items, and a lot of that information will actually come right up. This is just a static snapshot, so you can't really see that on this version of it. And this, particularly for the technical one, it helps with the pieces that you hover over. It tells you what you're looking at, but specifically for the technical one, it is something that kind of needs to be read in conjunction with the report. The dashboard is to supplement the report. So to really get into the weeds of this, you'd likely have to also read the report with it. For the public piece,
it's not too big.
The public piece, we did intend it to be kind of a yes or no, for you to be able to go to it, not look at any of the numbers, and just say, are we there or are we not there? And then there is links to the report as well if you wanted to dig into it some more. But we meant to keep that one as high level as possible.
Okay, thank you. Is there any thoughts that we could add a little bit more language to the status of the management goal block?
I mean, I think that the method can be revisited. It's meant to be revisited every management plan. And we also plan on updating it as we get more years of data. Right now, there isn't a next management plan.
Right.
But we did commit, so if there isn't another management plan, I guess in the next 10 years, we did commit in the Safefield technical subgroup to revisit parts of the calculation, particularly how we did agricultural incidental recharge. And that's in response to changing technology in agriculture.
Okay, I think we still have an edit that needs to be made there though, so it should say, although it could be possible to reach Safefield under certain limited scenarios with current practices. Okay, so it's ahead. I see. Current practices, not expected to reach. Okay. I have a question in the audience. Yes, ma'am.
I am wondering, can you take us to the non-technical version of this, please?
47, yeah, we're back. 47.
I'm wondering if do you have supplemental short document for folks to read in addition, because I'm questioning whether someone from the public is going to want to read the entire.
Right. We do not. I do wonder though if we could maybe add some language to this dashboard that tells you which section of the report to look at.
I'm just thinking boiling down the language a bit, so that way it's a well-crafted communication document directed to the public with, maybe a little bit more information, but written to that, whatever, 3rd or 5th grade level, whatever it is that you're aiming for. But because, I think I think it might be, you're going to get some people that are going to want to read the major document, but the vast majority of the folks are going to stop after getting this.
Right. I think it's something we can consider, putting something together. It's not something we have right now. I think it's something we can consider.
And one other comment as I'm looking through all of this is, okay, so I know that I think it's very early on in the supply and demand process, but that seems like that's also another fertile ground for information that could be used whenever it is that the Prescott AMA is folded into that process as well. But, it's another source of data. Well, why not hold it in?
Yeah, I think we will probably connect the two of them, at least be able to access both pieces. Once we do plan for the supply and demand assessment to have some sort of dashboard as well. That's kind of a little bit in the future. We haven't quite got that far yet, but we would like to have some sort of dashboard like this to be able to make it the public to be able to see the information.
Okay. We have some. Oh,
Got one more question. I haven't looked at the full report in a lot of detail. Is there a summary of our effort towards achieving safe yield in the AMAs where that goal is the goal in aggregate? I mean, we don't have a safe yield goal active management area that's achieving safe yield, correct?
Tucson is around or at Safefield.
Tucson's, I'm sorry.
Tucson's at or around Safefield.
At or around.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a little bit of concern about without Colorado River water supply, if they'll be able to maintain that.
Yes.
But in terms of long-term overdraft portion, they are pretty close to it.
Yeah, which does actually raise another whole issue, and that is access to subsidized imported water supply for Colorado River, which obviously doesn't exist here. Okay, thank you.
So Ms. Shepherd, it sounds like we have some questions on this topic.
We have a few questions and some comments, so we'll start first with Leslie Hoy. She says, even if the allowed amount of water were imported from the Big Chino, that would not be enough water to solve the overdraft. Shouldn't that be a part of the message to the public and our officials?
Yes, I think that's true.
But we're not required to solve overdraft.
No.
We're required to achieve safe yield.
And we're not even, the statute says attempts to achieve,
Attempt to achieve.
which means that we aren't actually required to meet safe yield at all costs. So.
And then we have another one from Nicholas Wallach. He says, stormwater is a true renewable water supply. Big Chino is not the only answer. The extraordinary lack of stormwater utilization is an answer. The Flood Control District of Maricopa County is actively looking at strategies for integrated water resource strategies, such as spreading/recharge basins, injection wells, flood MAR, green stormwater infrastructure, while supporting alternative energies and multi-use of existing flood control properties. What are the additional efforts within the Prescott AMA being taken to include stormwater utilization? And is Yavapai County Flood Control aware of stormwater as a resource? And are they included in the stormwater integration conversations? Happy to repeat any of those questions.
I'm not sure.
Would you like me to try?
Yes.
So, we look at Prescott Valley, they're looking in their general plan to increase stormwater capture or methods there. The city of Prescott is looking at it as well. Yavapai County is not at the table here, but they're looking at it from probably a different perspective than we would be looking at it for water supply augmentation. Gotcha. And there was one more element. I'll let it come back to me. Go ahead.
You probably meant to say Upper Verde Coalition recently received a grant from the Nature Conservancy to build primarily for rural areas outside the cities, a stormwater management plan.
Correct. So I think there's efforts being made along with rainwater harvesting, but on a massive scale, that's tricky. And then we're also, in comparison to say the Maricopa County area, we have high elevation, we have gradients that we're dealing with, and things run fast here. So we have to look at it from maybe a different engineering view than maybe Maricopa, which doesn't mean it's a bad thing, it's just a different landscape we're working with.
Just one more comment. Stormwater capture, I think, harvesting is awesome, but it has one drawback. It has to rain.
Yeah.
Member Munderlow always, considers the details of these things, these are important details.
That's true. And we do have another comment from Leslie. She says, I hope we as a region can move beyond blame and denial to really getting to work on solutions, such as more conservation, enhanced stormwater recharge, direct portable reuse, and other small and large techniques that are being discussed, encouraged, and utilized in the area. Nicholas also has another comment saying, hydrologists have found that roughly 98% of all precipitation that falls in Prescott does not reach the aquifer or any physical water portfolio and is lost to evaporation. Conclusion, 98% of precipitation is ultimately lost to evaporation, thus an underutilized resource.
Or runoff, it moves fast out of here.
Is that true?
Okay, did everybody, we didn't miss anyone? Okay, good. Okay. So that concludes that piece, unless you have anything else for business.
I did want to say, I know that was a fairly long and lengthy presentation, so there's any pieces of it that you'd like to come back to at another meeting and kind of hone in on and be happy to do that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very good. I appreciate that.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that has to be done for future decision making. So that takes us to a call to the council. Is there anything that's on your mind from this meeting or future meetings that you'd like to share? Hearing none. I did want to check in, and we usually have 5 members, so we'd like to look at that. So colleagues here or otherwise, if there are people that you think would be helpful to have on this group, that would be great to share with Director Miller. And there was another piece here. I think I'll save it for another time. Let me go ahead and move to a call to the public. Do you have any public here? Not really public here. They're in the business, but no calls. Okay, no responses. Okay, so unless there is an objection, I will adjourn this meeting. Everybody call it a day?
Do we need a motion?
Sure, go ahead and give me a motion.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good.
Is that separate?
Yeah, it's just 9 minutes.
11:40.